California annually experiences several months of critical fire weather when high temperatures and dry fuels set the stage for large fires like this. Fortunately, only 3% of all of the fires that start get to this stage. It is the large fire, however, that causes 98% of the damage and destruction. Under the right conditions, they can spread rapidly beyond the abilities of ground-based forces. Forest fires are controlled by depriving the fire of fuel along the outside perimeter. Men are still the key as our foot soldiers in a battle. All fire control operations are built around these ground-based firefighters. Bulldozers, fire trucks, and other firefighting equipment are used to help the men do a better job in a shorter time. None of them will replace manpower that must ultimately keep the fire within bounds and assure that it is dead out. Now, the air tanker has joined the arsenal of tools available to the fire manager. This highly mobile equipment becomes an aerial fire truck capable of cascading liquid chemicals along key portions of the fire line where other equipment cannot be readily or safely worked. To be effective, it too must be fully coordinated with the ground effort. Chemicals must be dropped where firefighters can use them to advantage. We have found that air tankers are effective more times than not in brush, grass, and lighter fuels. Open rolling topography also lends itself to effective air tanker operation. Fires in timber often produce tremendous amounts of heat and flame. Here, air tankers are of great value in helping to keep the fire confined to the ground and out of the crowns of the trees. Air tankers are at their best on small fires. One example of effective initial attack was noted on a small fire which occurred in a remote area involving long travel distances for ground crews. In the absence of ground follow-up, the objective of the air tankers is always to completely surround the fire if possible, stopping the head of the fire first and then tying in the flanks and the rear. In this case, rapid discovery time and quick dispatch permitted the aircraft to take action while the fire was still relatively small. This was the optimum situation in which air tankers were completely effective in knocking down and containing the fire. When the ground forces arrived 2 hours later, they had but to mop up the smoldering line. This one example would make one believe that air tankers were the answer to all the fire control problems. This is, of course, not so. It is the combination of air and ground forces working together that produces successful action. Large fires present special problems of their own because of the greatly magnified heat energy output and the increased perimeter. Air tankers are usually most successful on such large fires when used in flanking action, either with a direct or an indirect line. They can also be used to knock down spot fires, which are often started far ahead of the main fire by flaming embers carried by the wind. They also may be used effectively for pre-treating in advance of large fires, where a line must be established and there is not time for ground forces to construct such a line. In this case, the fire was not picked up during the first burning period. Work began at daylight of the second day, and by the time the fire had spread to the ridge, a line had been firmly established. Air tankers can be especially valuable on fires occurring in rocky outcrops, where it is extremely difficult for ground units to work effectively. Air tankers have many limitations. In addition to not being able to operate at night, they cannot perform the entire control job alone, but must be considered as merely another tool to supplement the efforts of ground units. A high percentage of failures by air tankers is due to the inability of ground forces to reach the fire quickly because of its isolation. Here is a case of the operation being a success, and yet the patient dies. As far as the initial action on the part of the aircraft was concerned, the operation was a complete success. Early discovery, again, permitted rapid dispatch of the aircraft, and they arrived while the fire was still relatively small. Strategy was good, and the drops were made across the head and along the flanks. The majority of the fire perimeter was very quickly knocked down. The problem here, however, was the lack of someone on the ground to take advantage of the situation. The inaccessibility of the area meant long travel time for ground forces. Therefore, the aircraft were on their own. Here, we needed a helicopter to place men on the ground promptly. After the first round of drops, and while the air tanker had returned to the airport to refill with retardant, the fire line again began to pick up and work its way through and around the retardant line. As the fire gained in intensity, it formed new heads and was ready to take off again. When the aircraft returned, there was still no ground support, and the whole procedure was repeated. For a second time, the fire spread was nearly halted. Another opportunity was offered to control the fire had ground forces been available. Finally, the fire burned through and outflanked the chemical lines and ultimately became a rather large fire before being controlled. This tells us that air tankers cannot completely replace other fire control tools, although they can contribute to a better overall job of fire control. Narrow canyons may dictate the use of only the more maneuverable air tanker types, and occasionally may cause the elimination of air tankers altogether. Dense smoke always presents dangerous flying conditions, especially when several aircraft are operating on the same fire. Often obscure targets, resulting in a wasted drop, the one drop that might have stopped the fire. High winds, as typified by this fire, restrict maneuverability at low altitudes and cause drift of retardants. Normally, steady winds of more than 30 to 40 miles per hour are enough to eliminate the use of air tankers. The ever-increasing spread of rural communities into wildland areas presents special problems in all phases of fire control. The use of aircraft may be restricted because of hazardous power and telephone lines. You have seen that the air tanker can seldom perform the entire operations, but it can be a highly effective fire tool. Actually, we have but scratched the surface. The search continues for new chemicals and new techniques of using air tankers. Many questions remain to be answered, but progress is being made.